enough to join us for the full show discussions for all three screenings in the Bergman Centennial series. And Dr. Sandy Camargo is faculty at the Department of English at the U of I. As I promised, we will try to keep it brief while also addressing the most important aspects of this film. I have two questions, and then I will turn it over to you guys for any questions that you might have. So my first question is, in my introduction to the series, I mentioned that this is Bergman intended this to be his last film, and can you contextualize it a little bit within his career and then also within his personal life?
Okay. Yeah, well, it's quite easy in a way because he'd been living in exile in Munich, in Germany, from 1976 to 1982. He was arrested in the middle of rehearsals at the Royal Dramatic Theatre in Stockholm in 1976 for tax fraud, tax evasion. And the charges were dismissed a few months later, but Bergman was so upset by all this that he decided to leave Sweden and move to Munich and started working in the theatre in Munich. And he made a couple of films in Germany. The most famous one, and the title of the film has just disappeared from my head. But it was a film.
Wasn't it From the Life of Marionettes?
Yes, From the Life of Marionettes, exactly. A film in German with German actors, which he sort of described, I think, as something, a dark little jewel. He said later. One of his friends, Jörn Donner, who was himself a filmmaker and a writer, and was at this point the head of the Swedish Film Institute, came to Bergman towards the end of the 1970s and said, I'll give you money to make a film, but the condition is you have to come to Sweden to make it. And Bergman was a bit reluctant to begin with, but then he ultimately ended up coming back to Sweden and making this film, which was really made for television, but there was the film cut was done, I think, largely for financial reasons, because this way it would get an international release, and it was turned into the most expensive film that was ever made in Sweden. I'm not sure, it might still be the most expensive, certainly at the time the most expensive that had been made in Sweden. I mean, compared to Hollywood budgets, it's peanuts, but by Swedish standards it was a lot of money, and quite controversial because Jörn Donner had blown the entire annual budget of the Swedish Film Institute on one film, and so a lot of other filmmakers were kind of aggrieved, understandably, but Donner was fairly unapologetic about it. And towards the end of this, Bergman said, "Right, that's it. This is the last film I'm going to make," which he sort of stuck to, but didn't quite. I mean, he ended up actually writing several more film scripts, which he then gave to other people. And he did about 5 years after this. He did actually start writing a new film script and was going to make it, but then he found he had problems with his stomach all his life, and he talks in his autobiography about his guts as almost a kind of a character separate from himself, out to sabotage him and his career. And he said, he took this as a kind of bad omen that his guts started playing up when he was writing this. So he decided, that's it, I'm not going to direct films anymore. So, but he still worked in the theatre for a good many years later. So I think that was what I have to say.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so the significance of this film in terms of his personal life and his career, right? Because it comes late in his career, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean,
who's
it's.
his father and who's his brother and all that stuff. That's what I think yours after.
Oh, okay.
We have a roman.
Yeah.
Play here.
And also, right, it's a biographical film, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes. Yes, I mean, I don't think it's it's not quite as simple as this is his father, this is his brother, but Yes, it drew heavily on his childhood, and the grandmother was based on his grandmother, you know, as he remembered her. Though that sort of fantastic warren of rich sort of red and green rooms, that was based on his grandmother's apartment. It was a place which he remembered with great warmth and great fondness as a place of immense happiness when he was a child. I mean, in some sense, it's hard to escape the idea that the bishop is a version of his father. I mean, he did say that, you know, his father could be, when his father was in a good mood, he could be tremendously fun and very good company. But then he had these black moods when he was just awful and very, very strict, a strict disciplinarian. Yeah, it's hard. I find it hard not to see this in some way as his father. And this whole bit at the end where the bishop comes and knocks him to the floor and says,
You'll never get rid of me.
Yes, you'll never get rid of me. And this was kind of true. I mean, this whole anxiousness that Bergman had, at least for expressed in a lot of his films about God, and is God really there? Is God absent? You know, all of this. I mean, there is a certain autobiographical truth in that. Again, a truth that something that was true for a lot of people of his generation too. I think it wasn't just Bergman, but I think a lot of people had similar sort of experience of religion and leaving religion.
Why is it set in 1907?
What was the question?
Why is it set in 1907?
That I think partly, I don't know, but I mean, one possible reason is that this is the year that a Dream Play was published, and it might just be that, okay, you know, I mean, at the end here, he's very visibly paying his debt to Strindberg.
Well, the movie begins in 1907, but it must end around 1910 based on, you know, age of characters, pregnancies, etc.
Well, as the bit quoted from Strindberg says, time and space do not exist. So.
I know.
I just thought I would ask.
No, fair question.
Well, because I'm always fascinated by films that are set just before World War I.
Yeah.
And the idea of some sort of nostalgic halcyon time when everyone was happy.
Yeah.
And you know, Gustav's speech at the end, after the christening, you know, he talks about the little world, and we know suddenly death will crop up, and we know suddenly the abyss will open up, and we all do, because we know it's only a matter of years before that's going to happen. And then he says, oh, but what the hell, we'll live in our little world and be happy.
Yeah, I mean,
that's okay, you know, we're meant to think that's okay. And I'm not trying to put that down, honestly, but because it does make us feel very good to be with these people who are so joyous. Yes?
Hmm?
Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously another thought that comes up. I mean, I don't know that it's. I mean, Sweden was neutral, so it didn't affect Sweden in quite the same way. Nevertheless, I mean, obviously, it was still on the sort of the northern end of Europe. And
Well, and as you said, he was after an international audience, as you said. Yeah. Did you have other questions?
Yeah. Right. So Bergman himself has said for this movie that it is a summation of his career as a filmmaker, and we see in it some of the repeating themes we have seen in his earlier film, right? So after the screening of Persona, we talked about the theme of the masks, right? So this was a central theme in that film, and here we see it recurring again in that scene between Emily and the bishop, in which they talk about masks and his mask being kind of seared into his face.
Which is indeed what happens to him.
Yes. But what other right? So can you talk a little bit about what he means by how is this film a summation of his career, and what recurrent themes that he has explored in his earlier films do we see here, other than masks?
Oh, okay. Right. Well, some of it, there's actually more of it in the TV version. I mean, yes, I know, but I'm getting to that. Okay. When you get
320 minutes.
Yeah.
If you ever sit down to watch it, by the way.
There's the opening scene where you see Alexander sort of having this vision or this dream or whatever it is, when the statue comes to life and beckons to him. There's also in the longer version there's a bunch of other sort of little motifs. You see a sort of the sort of bottom of Death's robes and the sort of what shall we call it? His reaping equipment dragging across the floor. I mean, it's a reference, sort of almost a slightly joking reference to the Seventh Seal. I mean, there's a lot of little bits like this which refer back to his own films. You've also got in the bishop's house, Alexander putting his hand against the icy window pane, and again, okay, we've got a little reference to.
Well, he does that in the beginning too, in the prologue.
Yeah.
Right. You know, he gets underneath the coverlet on his grandmother's bed, and it looks like at first that his hand is just underneath that, and then we realize it's a frosty window, and then he turns around and there's actually one of those sheer curtains. So he's between the curtain and the frosty window. Yeah. And you know, the fact that it opens with this little puppet theater and ends with a reference to the theater. It's such a beautifully structured film. I mean, it seems as if there's all kinds of different things going on, but when you can see these continual themes coming back regardless of the particular setting or the people that you're with. And it's just, you know, there's so many groups of three, for example, right? Three brothers, three systems of belief, if you want to think of it that way. You have the theater or art, you have religion, and then you have magic. You know, so there are these continual threes, which is such a potent number in religion and Christianity and so on. Yeah. And that, I mean, just as a film person who's not as knowledgeable about his overall career as you, I just noticed that sort of thing. The richness of the mise-en-scène, the continual reference to ritual, attached to all of these three things. Like there's theatrical rituals, there's religious rituals, there's magic rituals. And they're all designed to give play to the imagination that you actually can control your life in some way. Yeah? And I guess the theater wins, art wins. Art wins.
Right, so I also mentioned in my introduction that the three films that we chose are from the beginning of his career and then the mid-60s when he was kind of at the highest point of his... Yes, in the art film world, and then this is the film that he intended to be his last film, which, as you mentioned, he ended up making a few more films after that. But Bergman is a very philosophical filmmaker, right? So he uses films to kind of explore philosophical questions and existential questions and questions of religion very relentlessly and very intensely. So can we just talk a little bit about where he is philosophically with this film? If we were to think about where he started, right? Summer with Monica, his earliest film, which he did not write himself, then Persona, a film that he wrote and he directed, and then this coming late in his career that he's kind of himself being reflexive about, in that this is a summation of my career. How has he changed philosophically at this point compared to where he was earlier in his career, for example, at the Persona point, which was almost 20 years earlier, right? How do we see him different here?
Okay, that's a great question, and I think, I mean, again, this is, in some ways, it's a showdown with his upbringing, and it's a choice between an earthly life of sensual pleasure and joy and joie de vivre on the one hand, and a sort of a life of strenuous religious faith and belief in God and so on, and he rejects the latter and very much affirms the former. And that wasn't necessarily, that wasn't true earlier. Earlier on he was much more divided between them, but here he's kind of made his choice, I think.
Again, I like to see continuities between all of those modes, rather than differences. I mean, there's families in each one, for example. The idea of what is reality is put into question in all of those, somewhat through Alexander, but really just in the sense of like when Isaac steals them, and the imagination we see is a mixed blessing. On the one hand, it can make you happy. On the other hand, it can give you a bishop for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Okay, any questions about this part? Yes.
Thank you so much for putting on this series. It's been great. As I said at the beginning, these are the first Bergman films that I've seen, and I really enjoyed, in particular, your commentary about them. I was excited in the documentary at first to see Wes Anderson in it, who, though my knowledge of directors is very limited, I'm a big fan of Wes Anderson's. And it was my daughter who pointed out to me that the similarities between Summer with Monica and Moonrise Kingdom. Then I thought some of the cinematography in Persona reminded me of Life Aquatic, and this one had some reminiscence of the Royal Tenenbaums for me, with the family, with the colors, with the eccentricities and the wealth in the family. Do you have any idea if that's a well-known inspiration for Wes Anderson? I suspect that it is, since he's in the documentary. If not, maybe you could speak a little bit to, or if you're just not aware of that inspiration, if you could speak a little bit to Bergman's sort of general influences on modern cinema, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
I don't think either one of us is really equipped to do that. I'm sorry.
I'll come to the Wes Anderson series.
Can you think of references of more contemporary films that have referenced Bergman's films? So, right, we mentioned last time.
You know what I keep thinking about is Woody Allen.
Okay.
Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy, for
Yes.
example. And
Yes.
he's obviously thinking about a lot of this stuff.
Can anyone else think of references in contemporary movies to Bergman films?
Paul Schrader's new film is
Yes.
almost a remake of
Yes, certainly. Paul Schrader's new. Are you talking about First Reformed?
First Reformed.
Yes, First Reformed. Yeah, we mentioned after Summer with Monica that First Reformed references Winter Light to a great extent. There are really specific scenes that kind of very, very closely parallel Winter Light for sure, but also others. Yeah. And also, I personally, in this film, the scene between Alexander and the aunt and what was her name? Elena. Yes, but the scene between the two of them in which she whispers in his ear, right? Specifically that shot reminded me of Minority Report.
Oh, you mean Ismail? Do you the crazy brother in locked up in the cage where faces are next to each other,
Yes,
where he's having this kind of mind meld with
Yes.
that leads to apparently leads to the death of
that scene. So it reminded me of Minority Report. If you guys have seen Minority Report, one of the precogs, whose name also escapes me right now. The third precog, who is the very important precog, who has the Minority Report. First of all, she very much looks like Ishmael, and then also there are specific scenes in which she whispers in Tom Cruise's ears, where the shot is structured very similarly to these shots as well. So, I mean, yes, he has been, like we mentioned, also Arrival, right? Arrival, the scene in which Amy Adams's character meets the extraterrestrial creatures, kind of structured similarly to this very famous shot of the hand against the screen, and then also Blade Runner quotes that specific shot as well, right? So very, very iconic shot, right? And that is just one shot. So, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I just wanted to say one other thing
Oh,
that I
yes.
noticed, and this came out when we were talking about My Summer with Monica, was the difference in Bergman between exteriors and interiors. And with this film, I think more than the others, there's a movement. You know, there are exterior scenes in the beginning, but we become progressively more interior as the film goes along. And the interiors are very lush and rich and nice and pleasant and labyrinthine, even, one could say, yeah. But you do become progressively more interior, both with the settings and with what's going on with the people.
Yes.
I thought that was a nice structural
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. Yes, other questions?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And what I would add is that the one interior that stands in great contrast to that is, of course, the bishop's mansion. And the bishop's mansion is inhabited by the man who hates the imagination.
Right.
He has only one mask. He cannot imitate anything else. He's like the anti-art force, and he lives in a bleak interior, which he's proud of. He says it's stark, it's austere, it's pure.
Yes.
It's prison.
Uh-huh.
Other questions?
And is that sharpness something that his father really tried to impose on him? I was curious how much of this film reflected direct personal experiences of sort of abuse and horror in Bergman's life.
Some of it did, for sure, yeah. The bit where he, we first really get to see the first real scene with the bishop. The camera does pan over him in the theatre earlier, but that's before you know he's going to be important. The bit where he's forced to go in and sort of the bishop confronts him with this lie that he's told everyone at school that he's been sold to the circus and they're going to come and collect him at the end of term and stuff. This was something which actually Bergman did as a child. This was and his father would. When he misbehaved, which I think he did quite a lot, as children do, but he would be. There was on some occasions he was locked in a cupboard. So this thing of being sort of locked up in the attic or being locked up in a cupboard, this was related to that. Some other things which aren't in here, but being sort of also being everyone in the household being instructed not to talk to him until this would go on for the whole day, and then in the evening he'd be called in and sort of beaten by his father, and then he'd be forgiven. So then everyone could talk to him. So there was a. It's awful, but it's probably not actually that exceptional for the way children were raised back then. It was child rearing was a lot more harsh, and certainly if you look at sort of 19th century child rearing manuals, which I have a little bit, they're pretty hair raising. There were certainly elements of that. One of the things that actually, which because I actually brought in the author's foreword to a dream play partly because Bergman references it explicitly, but also because I think this really speaks to so eloquently to what Bergman is doing here. Time and space do not exist upon a minimal ground of reality. Imagination spins out and weaves new patterns, a mixture of memories, experiences, sudden inventions, absurdities, and improvisations. The characters divide up, are doubled, are understudied, dissipate, condense, flow out, are gathered in, and it sort of and that sort of loose kind of mutating form. I mean, and that idea of a mixture of memories, experiences, inventions, absurdities, improvisations, which is also why you can't take this too literally as well. I mean, you sort of have to go with the flow. And Bergman was quite, when he spoke about it, he also spoke of it in terms of something where he was not too concerned about it being coherent. He said, so, you know, sometimes he had Alexander's point of view, sometimes his mother's point of view, sometimes the grandmother's point of view, and he was sort of, he himself was being sort of quite intuitive and not too controlled when he put it together. There's also something about, I mean, again, going back to Persona, the economy of means in that film, and a lot of his films, you know, it's a very, very stripped bare, small number of actors, a concentrated script. Yes, bare mise-en-scène, and in a sense it's very, very disciplined. Here he's got about 51 different speaking parts in this film. You can see, looking at the credits, the sheer number of sort of actors involved. And by the way, one other family, so you may have noticed that the name Mats Bergman, who plays Aaron in the film, that was actually Bergman's son. And he actually looks a lot like his father. They look very, very similar.
Other questions?
Sort of a random fact, but I don't know.
Well, one thing I thought that was interesting was that we're not just limited to Alexander's imagination. It's not just he who can see Oscar, or, you know, Helena can see him and touch him and talk to him. And I think that's really important. Otherwise, we would think we were dealing with a crazy person. Yes?
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Go on.
There was obviously that Strindberg reference in this film, and I remembered that earlier in the series you had mentioned him also. I also know that you are an expert on Strindberg's work. Is that a common theme? Is that did Bergman pull from that reference for many films, or no?
Well, yeah. Bergman loved Strindberg deeply. Although you can also see here there's a bit of ambivalence there too. I mean, the grandmother saying, "Oh, that horrible old misogynist." But then starts reading the play and is sort of drawn into the beauty of the language, and you know that is the problem that sort of so many of us who are attracted to Strindberg's writings have. He was, in a lot of ways, he was a pretty unpleasant man, but he was also a very brilliant writer.
And I wonder if that, right, that line, because I paid attention to it as well, right, the grandmother calling him a misogynist, if this is a nuance to his attitude towards Strindberg that came with time. Because I feel like earlier in his career he was kind of even more, was coming even more from a position of veneration of Strindberg, right, while Strawberries was also very influenced by a dream play. So I wonder if this ability to kind of continue to admire him for his work, but also accept that he may have been a misogynist, is part of the philosophical transition that he has made from his earlier career.
I mean, I should also say, if you know a dream play, that final scene, it makes sense in a. I mean, when Emily says there's parts for both of us in it, it's very obvious which two parts she's talking about. And I suppose the other thing to say about Strindberg, and perhaps the other way in which the two, he and Bergman relate to each other, is that for all his reputation for misogyny, Bergman created a lot of very powerful parts for women in his plays. I mean, over and over again, including a dream play. The main character in a dream play is Indra's daughter, who becomes a human to experience human life, and that's clearly the part which is intended for Emily. And then the part that's in, because the grandmother at that point is wearing this shawl, and there's this character in a dream play who wears a shawl and who everyone brings their troubles to her, and sort of she's the one who comforts everyone. And so clearly there's this sort of interplay between the two going on at the end there.
I'm curious why the film may have been named the way it was.
Yeah, what about Fanny, right?
Yeah.
Questions always asked that.
Yeah.
Well, there's more. I think there is actually more of her in the TV,
Not much.
but not much. No. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
She's there. She's just staring at things. She barely speaks. Don't ask me. I don't know why.
Did he have a sister?
Yes. Yes, he did. Margarita. Something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, he had a brother and a sister.
Yeah.
His sister became a novel.
But yes, I think that's a wonderful question. Why doesn't she do more? Why isn't she more important?
Well, I do have the sense that the play is, the movie, it's about, in spite of the fact that it uses a lot of historical events, many from his own life, that he's trying to tell a message, and I can't begin to tell what the full extent of the message is, but I have the sense that Fanny is, somehow she's the beacon, somehow she's the answer, that you don't have to get caught up in a lot of things, that if you're quiet and steadfast, you live a pretty good life, and I know that's how it strikes me.
Well, I think it is important and interesting how dominant women are in this film, even to the two female babies that are born at the end, who represent the future for all of them. Yeah. And so maybe in a way that's why there has to be a Fanny in the title at least, because he wants us to be paying attention to women, to females throughout.
He also seems to act as like a witness to a lot of the events.
Yes.
Yes, she's an active witness, kind of our surrogate in a way, staring at things, not really knowing what to make of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the very end, there's that great line where Emily says to Helena, "Now we're in charge."
That's right.
Yes, because really the only, Carl disappears pretty much, Oscar's dead, and everybody is just going to be laughing at Gustav Adolf for the rest of his life. So yeah, yay women.
Maybe we have time for one more question or comment. Does anybody have one last question?
Or anything else?
No?
Thanks for the discussion.
Yeah,
It's
thank
a
you.
beautiful, beautiful film, and I really admire you all for staying and seeing it, and
Thanks for
and
bringing this film. This is just a phenomenal opportunity.
Thank you for coming to see them. Yeah, next week. So they played as part of our Essential Cinema series. So I should mention next month on October 9th we have our Essential Cinema screening will be Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev, which is a new 4K restoration by Janus Films as well. And then our Essential Cinema film for November will be Bicycle Thieves, which is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year, and that will also be a 4K restoration. So you can go to our website, and then under programs, if you go to Essential Cinema, you can keep track of when these screenings are.
Are there discussions after those as well, or no?
We don't know that yet.
Okay.
If we can make it happen, we will. Yes, we're glad that there is so much excitement about this Bergman series. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for staying.